We've got George Lawrie from Forrester, Vice President and Principal Analyst. He's going to be giving us lots of good information about our subject today around the state of supplier collaboration. And then we're going to have Eyal Morad, who is Deputy COO and VP of Supply Chain for IAI, Israeli Aerospace Industries. And he's going to give us some of a view from the ground of what's going on with regard to supplier collaboration in their context, which is quite an interesting look at things as well. I'm Paul Noel from Nipendo, kind of doing the MC for you today, and driving us through this presentation. We're happy to bring this to you.
Do you remember when network synergy was going to make everything so easy? We'd all belong to one network and we'd be able to exchange data and collaborate together well. Actually, you know, there are factors that are driving some marketplace participation. One of the things we've noticed is particularly during COVID that people accelerated their marketplace participation. One of the things that they wanted to do is to reach their B2B customers more effectively. And we know that B2B buyers are buying directly now. They're having much less contact than they used to have with representatives. So the B2B world is beginning to automate around that. And vertical marketplaces have absolutely proliferated, as you can see, an awful lot of them here, even just in December 2020. But on the next slide, we can also see there are some challenges. So there's always been the challenge that people don't want to belong to just one network. They're often in multiple networks, certainly one that they in their sell side and one in their buy side. They've always worried about the standards of exchanging data, the cadence of update, the neutrality of any committees that are involved in running these kind of exchanges. And the biggest problem of all has been around content. So we've seen, particularly, I'd say, in the B2C world, that content has driven engagement and driven, I would say, the traffic on the web much more than anything else. And that content has been highly differentiated. It's been unable to be standardized. And we're beginning to see the same thing in B2B, particularly in the markets where I work, automotive and aerospace and defense, where the collaboration is very much around content and simulation and collaborative testing, something that's really hard to do in, let's say, a regulated network. It has to be done in a way more one-to-one. So it's been also a massive challenge around accurate, available to promise and capable to promise dates. So people have been hoping to do this forever. And there've been also challenges around onboarding and data feed maintenance. So in our own personal lives, we perhaps belong to LinkedIn and Facebook, maybe one or two others. And why do we do that? Because we can easily onboard the people that we want to work with. And we need to be thinking a bit about that too, in the way that we go forward in our supplier collaboration. What about those barriers to collaboration? I've talked a little bit about some of them. Some of those barriers involve, I say, the number of partners that you have and how widespread they are and the level of transparency or otherwise that they are able to provide to you.
Right. This is where I think what we would suggest is that folks ask themselves and they look at examining what they're doing and really from two different points of view. Up at the top there is a question, if you're a supplier, to understand how many marketplaces or network you're participating in, and down below as a buyer, you know, what percentage of your vendors collaborate with you digitally. Voices. And what's interesting here is you should kind of identify if you're a supplier with the question above and if you're a buyer with the question below. But even as a supplier, you should be worried about what the buyer's thinking of those questions. And as a buyer, you have to worry about what the suppliers are thinking, because that affects participation in a network. If everybody's not happy to be on the network, then the network just doesn't work. So understanding just how useful it is, how consolidated it gives your view for suppliers, and how much digital seamless kind of communications can happen as a buyer makes a big difference for everybody.
So what does it take to master agility at scale? Well, we think there are really three things in our supply network maturity assessment that we use with our clients, and they really drove this. They said, first of all, you've got to authenticate who's in the network. So who are you really talking to? Who are the customers and suppliers? And ideally, you want to onboard them, but you want to know something about them. Then you've got to synchronize. You've got to synchronize the data that you exchange. And we talked a little bit about that. So how do we know what a purchase order or a purchase order acknowledgement is? And how do we synchronize that? How do we synchronize our expectation of demand, our available to promise or capable to promise? How do we do that? And then how do we share between us these collaborative schedules that are changing all the time? And if you've ever run any kind of scheduling system, you know that it's constantly producing action messages. So in the old days of MRP and DRP, always producing action messages, expedite that purchase order, delay that work, releasing that work order to the factory. Now we've got to do that with all our partners as well. So that sharing is a very important part of this maturity. Let's look at the next slide. So
Sorry
if we
about that.
just,
Yep, on to the next one. Let me see if I can do that. Oh, yeah. Sorry, very quickly. There we go.
now I talked about collectively anticipating demand. This sounds a lot easier to say than it actually is to do. Why? Because there's so many factors of demand. In the old days, and particularly in automotive, you used to come up with the demand yourself as the OEM, and then you would give out the schedules to your tier one suppliers. Now, tier one suppliers are no longer very happy with that. As one of them said to me, my OEM, they decide what's going to be the split between compact and SUVs. I have to ship all my, in his case, drivetrains to them. They sit on my balance sheet until he uses them. That's not fair. We need to have a way that we collaborate on that. We think we know more than they do what the proportion of compact and SUVs would be, and we'd like to have a hand in that. So this collective anticipation of demand means being able to absorb lots of different feeds, to apply AI to them, and to see what does it mean for each person in this supply network. Let's look at the next one. And it means also collectively responding to a shortage. So when perhaps, we see that demand is spiking, do we have inventory available? Do we have capacity in the network? Can we replan? And what will it take to do that? Can we suggest a replan? Who can accept that? Who cannot? Who else in the network could take up the slack? So collectively responding to these challenges is part of the scaling of the agility that we need to respond to a much more, I say, dynamic and risk-ridden world. Let's go on to the next one. And really by doing that, by publishing a new schedule and then seeing who can accept it and who in the network can commit to it, that's what enables us into a multi-tier supply chain to be able to respond to change and to publish to the end customer at the end of this multi-tier supply chain something that they can rely on, that something that they can be sure we're going to be able to deliver to, even though we might have multiple different layers in the bill of material, the ultimate bill of material, and many different partners, perhaps across the world, collaborating. So the key is to be able to do this in a platform that enables us to do it without calling people, without IMing them, and without sending them emails that we hope they'll respond to. Let's look at the next slide. And it's really integrating the planning and the execution across each of the, I'd say, planning horizons. So a short-term one, a medium-term one, and a long-term one. And for each role that really helps you to drive this agility at scale. So we think about people who are planning for the day, for the week, for the month, and maybe even for years, and thinking about major new capacity in those cases. But what we need to do is to be able to have the data and to be able to have the partners able to work with us to understand what does this mean and how do we collaboratively respond to, let's say, a spike in demand or maybe an unexpected shortage in supply. And it's why when we look at our supplier risk and performance analysis that we periodically look at. I mean, we used to think of, suppliers, yeah, ratings, but now it's something much more than that. It's about, what's level of risk do we attach to each supply for each item that they supply us, and how do they perform in terms of helping us to deliver this value to the end customer at the end of the chain. So you can see multiple different factors that we take into account here as we segment these supplier risk and performance platforms into different types. Let's look at the next one, Paul. And it's really using that helps us to focus on good rather than low cost suppliers. I'm sure you know there's a pivot really away from cost centric supply chain to something that performs. And what does perform mean? It means it drives the resilience, the sustainability, the reliability that the end customer at that end chain really wants. And it means that we're taking into account PLM factors, so we're authenticating the identity. You can imagine how important that is, let's say in aerospace and defense, but also in medical devices. We're looking at their motivation to collaborate with us on product development, and we're looking at the content and transparency of the lower tiers in our manufacturing supply chain. We're looking at their methods of production as well. So we have this a lot is, so how are they treating their labor? How are they treating the environment in doing this? Needs to be part of the transparency for regulatory compliance. And it's also part of the motivation for them, let's say for us working with them, to boost their ratings, their environmental ratings, and the ratings with which they treat the community and their labor. And finally, in the supply chain itself, around an enterprise risk management program and the ability to support a continual network redesign. We've always done this for demand, but we need to be able to do it for supply as well. So if the factory is going to be closed because of an outbreak of COVID, we need to be sufficiently agile to find another supplier, to engage them quickly, to know that they're already authorized to work with us, and then to bring them in so that we don't disrupt the supply to the final supplier. Let's go on to the next one, Paul. And one of my clients says it's not really about a digital twin for a market, it's sometimes about a digital twin for a specific order. And this is very challenging. So how can you build that twin? You've got to have a lot of data and you've got to have the modeling of every aspect of that supply chain. But it's really because people are doing that investment in supply chain is catching up on front office. We've been investing heavily in Salesforce automation, in CRM and e-commerce, all those things to make promises to customers. But we can't fulfill the promise unless our supply chain investment catches up. And it has to be able to orchestrate people at lower levels in the supply chain in order to be sure that we can meet our promise. So these are the trends that we're seeing changing procurement. So supplier risk is becoming something strategic. It's moved way away from compliance. Do we just tick the box once a year? No, it's about dynamically looking at that risk. How is this changing all the time? And how are we re-engaging different suppliers as one becomes too risky to use? Innovation is replacing cost optimization in supply chain. So who will work with us on this reliability and on driving forward a new way of working? And then self-service is creating a totally new community of buyers who are outside procurement. They need to be guarded and guided. And that's really where the AI and algorithms come in to help with, yes, specific procurement functions, but also to help the non-professional buyers to stay within the rules and not to create additional problems or risks. So those are 4 trends that we see changing procurement, and those are driving a new kind of smart, responsive supply chain that thinks about people, thinks about the planet, and of course thinks about profit. How do we do it? We've got to embed AI to anticipate those fluctuations in demand and supply. We've got to sense and respond using current market, asset, inventory data, and of course social data about the status of those suppliers. So there's plenty of third-party data that we can use and combine. The trick is to mine it and to use it sufficiently quickly to make decisions. So what do we have to do? We've first of all got to change our culture and our process and then capitalize on new technologies. So we've got to coach our colleagues in this idea of supplier value rather than cost. And I think many people now are really aware of that. We've got to continuously, or have the ability to continuously replan the network for sustainability and resilience. So risk, an increase in risk in one area should reconfigure the network for us. We've got to use AI to monitor those risks and to boost resilience. And we've got to use supply networks that validate and authenticate the members so that we know with whom we're sharing data and how much we're sharing. And if you're interested to know more about this, we do have a supply network maturity self-assessment that you could look at and could work through for yourself.
Thanks, George. Great information there. I think what we want to do now is turn to Eyal and to hear a little bit about the reality that he's dealing with. Eyal, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, guys. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Just a few words on IAI, Israel Aerospace Industry. We are a government-owned company located in Israel. Annual sales roughly around $4.5 billion. Procurement spend around $3 billion, and company backlogs is around $13 billion. We basically consist of 4 different divisions, mainly heavily occupied with aerospace, defense, and civil applications. Pretty much every area of technology that you guys can think of. Paul, please, next slide. As far as procurement snapshots, supply chain snapshot, basically, we are dealing with 400,000 PO line item on a yearly basis, roughly around 5,000 active suppliers that are getting these POs. Annual sales, annual spend as for the procurement is around $3 billion a year, and roughly around 500 plus or more, 550 employees dealing within the supply chain in different positions like buyers, supplier managers, contract managers, and on. I guess that related to what George just said, I mean, we hear a lot, lots of companies talking about the buzzwords, you know, the machine learning, BI, AI, RPAs, data mining, and on. That's definitely the way and the solution to move forward. Unfortunately, in many cases, we find that companies are very reluctant as for embedded these technologies and using these level of automation in their process. But definitely the way is, that's the way, and every company needs to take the right step in order to contain that and change eventually the environment that they are operating in. I think that the COVID as well basically changed the reality that everybody knows. In most cases, supply chain process worldwide changed not very much in the last 10 years or more. I think that basically COVID plus the geopolitics that was mentioned related to the Ukraine and Russia makes everybody understand that we need to change the way that we are working, the way that we communicate, the way that we are processing information. And therefore, everybody is being driven into supplier collaboration solutions. We basically working with Nipendo for the last 10 years, I guess now. Wow, 10 years. And we started to work with them related to invoices. I think that we found a very efficient company that are quite flexible in order to facilitate and to adjust the process into AI requirements and needs. Since in many cases we are enterprise company, and as such, we cannot use an off-the-shelf as-is solution and need to be adjusted. That's, by the way, the right way to do in any company, to find the win-win or the midway in order to facilitate the process. I think that as of today in invoices, as far as invoices, we are pretty much in very high numbers. I mean, roughly around more than 80% of the invoices that we are getting on a yearly basis for 5,000 suppliers worldwide, definitely within the country, are being processed through Nipendo. That's process by its own, basically brought us into a place that we can actually verify and shorten the lead time to handle each and every documents. And obviously, it's reflecting the labor that was invested in that. We used to have, like, I don't know, a group of almost 20, 30 people that are dealing with that. And frankly speaking, not so much successfully. Right now, we are only with few and lots of RPA dealing with that instead of labor, investing labor, and the process is basically working smoothly for the last many years. I think that when we actually look into a partner in order to expand our supplier collaboration solution that we are using right now, we actually review several companies within Israel. There are several solutions. Eventually, we took a decision to carry on with Nipendo because of many reasons. One of the reasons was obviously the past experience that was positive. All the invested labor and infrastructure between IT and Nipendo solution, that is also one of the critical parameters that allow us to move on with the process. And thanks God, in COVID time, we actually ahead of market in some ways, and it's thanks to that. We are in a process right now of basically integration, supposed to start, I hope, in about 2 months, and everything looks quite positively. I'm trusting Nipendo to understand the requirement and the resources required during this process, which actually been proven so far, and it's very good because in every new process that you embedded, obviously you have to think on the supplier side and the II's employees that need to be on board in order to facilitate the process and to get the benefit of it. And that's definitely a challenge. The integration is a very critical stage, and I'm sure that we actually will do well with that. We actually took a decision to move several processes right now that we are doing internally with, by the way, we are working with SAP, ECC version, if it means something to anyone. So we actually took several decisions to move with several major processes to Nipendo. Eventually, the long-term plan is to see Nipendo as a II main hub for the supplier collaboration between II and the supplier network. We are taking it step by step. So far, so good, I have to say. We find Nipendo extremely friendly and efficient in many cases. We are enjoying basically their added value with other suppliers and other industries, not related to defense or aerospace necessarily, and that's a good thing. And I'm sure that as we move forward, we'll see that basically we'll enjoy and have the benefit of this long-term plan of supplier collaboration through third parties such as Nipendo, and I definitely will get the benefits and gain the benefits out of it. So just to summarize, I mean, although the application that we see in every company concluded with a sophisticated Excel, macro, Excel spreadsheet, PowerPoints, everybody needs to move forward and to embed their own share, small share of automations and innovation in the supply chain. I think that today, unlike 2 years ago, it's quite clear to everybody, CEOs, CFO, COO, whatever, that supply chain process need to move forward, like exactly productions and other process within the organization. Supply chain is not to taking as granted. Again, that's quite obvious now after COVID and geopolitical situation in the Europe. And supplier networks actually counts, and as soon as everybody will embed these ideas, they will be able to gain the benefits out of it. So that's my share of thoughts to you guys.
Great, thank you, Eyal. Appreciate that, and it's interesting to hear how things are working, and there's still work to be done, right? As things evolve, it's also good to hear that the supply chain is being recognized for its criticality. Although we all wish that we didn't have to have these disruptions to make that the case, obviously. But perhaps a little respect for the supply chain folks out there is a good thing for the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, then, folks. George had a lot of research behind this. That you can reach out to Forrester for to back up a lot of those things, and there's more details out there. But that concludes our time today. We really thank you for participating, and for those who are listening to the recording as well, to be able to get this information, and we hope that this is a continuing conversation. So we give you back the rest of your day, and we'll move on from there. Thank you very much.